Fridge Barron.
Thanks, everybody. Good morning. All right, this might be a risky thing to do. Let me see if I can figure this out. Hey. Risky way to start off first thing in the morning, but I'd like everyone to close their eyes, please. And on your name tags, I ask that you write down a sound that makes you think of home. If it's not too much to ask, I would like you to try to hear that sound. Try to feel the feeling that it calls up in you. I've always been an extremely auditory person. I grew up on the plains east of Boulder, surrounded by a rich and varied soundscape, so many sounds call up that experience of home place for me, perhaps none more so than the throaty warble of the western meadowlark. If you haven't already, please feel free to open your eyes. And could I get some volunteers? What were some of your sounds? I would love to know. Yes?
Mine was that for...
No kidding. That's awesome. Cicadas. A shower. Excellent. Crackling fire.
Water hitting a dock.
Water hitting a dock. A tea kettle. Yes? Coffee maker brewing. Jazz music. Awesome. So good variety here, and I'm glad to see that in several of these examples, water has appeared, and that might be because we've rhymed to with a theme that is about water. But I do think it's worth saying that there has never been a human home place without some sort of relationship to water and its sounds, whether that's the babble of a creek, the patter of rain falling, the splash of a bucket in a well, or tea or coffee brewing, water rushing through taps, a shower, a washing machine. Water is fundamental to life, and it is fundamental to the human experience. It's all around us, it is inside of us, it is essential. And water shapes the way that we live in our places, whether by its abundance or by its scarcity, as we know in Colorado. As Dave mentioned this morning, I find it extremely telling that water was selected as a theme for Creative Morning Talks all over the world by Perth, Australia, the driest city on the driest continent. And so even by its lack, water has a huge shaping force in how we exist in our places. Now, speaking of Creative Mornings, here's a fun fact. People who come to Creative Mornings Talks, that means you guys, and this is actually true. I was horrified when I read this. The number one thing that people coming to see Creative Mornings Talks want to hear about is how successful creatives build their career. Now, if you're anything like me, reading that makes your imposter syndrome rear its ugly head. Words like successful in career give you the willies. And join me, raise your hand if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome. If you've ever felt like, who am I to be talking about this? Almost everyone's hands went up. If your hand didn't go up, please come see me after the talk. I'd love to steal your secrets. So a disclaimer, my story today is not about building your creativity into a successful career, whatever that means. It is a story about the places that people call home, about trying to use creativity in meaningful ways, to make art with a purpose, and it is a story about water, and of course how all these things flow together. My art of choice is music, and just as water is fundamental, I would argue that music is also essential to the human experience. Music, listening to it or playing it, taps into deep, ancient parts of our human brain. And music has arisen in cultures all over the world throughout history, every human society. I love this. Almost 40,000 years ago, some of the oldest human artifacts ever found were musical instruments. Flutes made out of the bones of birds. As water takes many forms, whether as a towering cumulus cloud, a snowflake, a river, even a rainbow, Music also takes many forms. It is multifaceted. It has almost infinite iterations. So I'm here today to tell you about my most recent musical project, which I took on with my three dear friends, James, Sarah, and David. Together, the four of us are a band. We're called the infamous Flapjack Affair, for better or for worse. And this project started with two great human commonalities, things we share: music and the experience of being connected to and shaped by a place. We chose to carry out this project in a region where the human relationship to water and to land is extremely tense and contentious, and often borders on explosive, the Colorado River Basin. We decided to trace the Colorado River from Grand Canyon National Park all the way up to the river's headwaters in Rocky Mountain National Park, stopping in units of the Park Service, parks, national monuments, public lands that weren't protected but were up for protection. And our goal was to meet people who have crafted their lives in the Colorado River Basin, to hear their stories about these places that have shaped them, these places that they love, and the challenges that are facing those places. And then to bring all of that together in our music and to write original music inspired by those encounters and perform it in beautiful places along the river basin. The Colorado River Basin is a place of great intersection. Ecosystems, human cultures and ways of being, pressing questions of land and water use all come together. You might say that the Colorado River is a confluence of more than just tributaries of water, but of human and environmental issues. We traveled with a film crew who captured our journey so that we could share the story more broadly. And since I'm a sucker for extended metaphor, we named the film Confluence, which is now touring the film festival circuit. Hopefully it comes to a festival near you, and if not, you guys are getting a sneak peek. In a year or so, hopefully it'll be available and up online. You can follow all of that at our website, confluencethejourney.com. So today, I want to tell you about Confluence, and we're going to do that by visiting four of the people who hosted us on our journey through the river basin. Amala Posey, who's a National Park Service ranger in Grand Canyon National Park. Pete Sands, who is a musician, activist, and member of the Navajo Nation, who grew up in what is now Bears Ears National Monument. The Monger family, a family of ranchers in the Yampa River Valley. And Diana Ukwala, who is a Havasupai medicine woman. We're going to start with Amala, and while I'm going to tell you about the other three, I'm going to show you Amala. I'd like to share an excerpt of the film with you, and hopefully this will give you a sense of how we sought to interweave the place we were visiting, the stories of our host, and our music. So without further ado, if we could get the lights, or they're already off, yeah? Scratch that. Let's meet Amala.
My feet remain on the ground. Canyon.
It's taken 6 million years for the Colorado River to carve out this canyon. And just to feel so insignificant, both in time and in space, I think is hugely powerful.
few places can you literally hike into the age of the Earth and see rocks that are almost 2 billion years old, almost half the age of the Earth exposed. Every layer that you see, every different color change is representing a different environment through time. You came at a good time because in another 5-6 million years, this place may look completely different. The canyon will continue to get deeper and wider. The big difference now is that when this was forming 6 million years ago, we didn't have dams along the course of the Colorado River and 7 different states depending on the water. So the carving power today with the dams is nowhere near what it used to be. Those dams are now blocking over 80% of the sediment that once came through. Lots of species evolved with that sediment. That's how they hid from their predators. So it changes the ecosystem. If we're lucky, we'll hear the canyon wren.
Canyon wren.
It is my favorite sound, and you should definitely write a song based on the canyon wren.
What does their song sound like? Awesome.
Grand Canyon is 1.24 million acres. What a lot of people don't realize is surrounding us is tribal land. And we have 11 traditionally associated tribes who have lived here for up to 12,000 years. And the longer that we go without listening to them and taking into account their lessons learned, we won't get anywhere. I started working here when I was 20 years old, 13 years here at Grand Canyon, and I often say this place raised me. It humbles me to stand here and just think about all the folks that came before me and all the folks that will come after me. And how do we set the stage so that the next generation will conserve and protect?
Pamela is pretty rad. I highly recommend you YouTube her appearance on Sesame Street if you want to see more of her. Elmo is way more compelling than we are as characters. So from early on in this journey, we had to grapple with the complexity of the places we were visiting. There's so much going on in the Colorado River Basin. There's the system-wide crisis, where human management of the river through dams, drainages, and pipelines has taxed it so heavily that it no longer reaches the sea, which is crazy if you think about it. It's flowed that way for millions and millions of years, and in one human generation, it doesn't make it there anymore. Of course, that management system allows 40 million people in 7 states to live where they live, including in Denver and along the Front Range. So it's complicated. And climate change is turning up the heat on all of this, making all of these matters more pressing, making the water shortage ever more critical. And then under this overarching crisis, each place also had its own unique struggles and conflicting perspectives. So we were constantly encountered with this question of what do we choose to portray and how do we portray it? So to give you an example of this and illustrate it, we'll go to our next spot, which is Bears Ears. Bears Ears is just over 2,000 square miles in southeastern Utah. And during the film shoot, a coalition of 5 First Nations had come together, actively trying to petition the US government to designate Bears Ears as a national monument. And their hope was that this designation would stop oil and gas extractive industries from coming into this region, which they had considered sacred for many, many generations. Now, many First Nations folks were in favor of the monument, but interestingly, many also opposed designating Bears Ears as a monument. And I was curious about this and asked around, and it turns out that a large faction of First Nations people simply don't trust the United States government to regulate their sacred land. And perhaps this is not so surprising when you think of the long history of broken treaties, lies, and massacres that define the relationship between the US government and these people. And of course, from a modern American political perspective, those broken treaties seem like ancient history. The 1800s is forever ago. But you have to remember that the stories of these First Nations in these places stretch back far, far longer than ours do. They have roots there that trace back over 11,000 years. That's older than agriculture. Older by far than ancient Rome and ancient Egypt. And so for them, these broken treaties are like yesterday. Our host in Bears Ears was Pete Sands. And Pete had grown up in what is now Bears Ears National Monument. And so he had childhood friends who fell on both sides of the issue, for the monument and against the monument. And he told us that it was exceptionally difficult to draw a clean line in conversation between what was right and what was wrong. And this inspired a lyric in one of our songs, which was, "No black or white, all bends to gray." President Obama did end up designating Bears Ears as a national monument, and a few months later, President Trump slashed the size of the monument by 85%. So while there is now a Bears Ears National Monument, it's only 15% of what the First Nations Coalition wanted protected. All of that transpired after we had already finished the film shoot. So we were left thinking, okay, do we get caught up in the political play-by-play? Do we try to stay abreast of this as it unfolds? And in documentary, more than perhaps any other art form, you're super limited to what you were able to capture. So instead of the political play-by-play, we tried to hit on a deeper theme that could transcend whatever political battle happened to be going on that day. And because of that, the film became a meditation on the ways that people are shaped by the places where they become who they are, and the ways in turn that people shape those places. That shaping is super complicated and has lasting impacts. And when you are thinking about that relationship, you have to grapple with incredibly difficult questions, such as one that Pete posed to us. He said, with regard to Bears Ears, you have to decide if the people who live in the area are not as important as the resources that they need somewhere else. So when we're weighing our relationship with place, these weighty, messy choices, we have to be responsible. It demands that we be thoughtful and intentional in our relationship with our home place. There's no single version of what it means to be responsible with your place. And that brings us to our next location, the Yampa River Valley in northwestern Colorado, near Steamboat. The Yampa is absolutely critical to the Colorado River system. It's the last major free-flowing tributary to the Colorado. And as such, it's essential for the well-being of endangered species such as the delightfully named humpback chub, who you saw animated leaping out of the water in Emila's video clip. Our hosts in the Yampa River Valley were the Monger family, a family of ranchers. Now, granted, a rancher is probably not what your average environmentalist pictures when they think land conservation. There's a ton of complexity and room for argument there over whether ranching constitutes conservation. But I found it to be undeniable that the Mongers did have an explicit relationship with their land. If the land was healthy, the family was stable. And the family had developed over generations an intimate and functional knowledge of their home place because they were dependent on that place's well-being. David, the guitarist in our band, while we were there, asked the matriarch of the family, Loretta, who sat there in the center, what she thought our generation was missing, what ranching culture could offer to people like us. And she said that by and large, she thought our generation had lost touch with its roots, that we were adrift, and that we had inherited this sense that, for whatever reason, the grass is always greener somewhere else. This idea of roots really fascinated me because being rooted in a place means not just being connected to that place, but being nourished by that place. It means having inherited a way of being in a place through many generations of cultural heritage. Roots that deep, a connection that deep as the Mongers, has consequences. That connection evolves into a love for the place, and that love evolves into responsibility. And so maybe it should come as no surprise that Loretta's daughter, Tira, on the horse there, has received a degree in environmental studies and has worked on projects enforcing compliance with the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, all while helping her family run the ranch. Our final host for today is Diana Ukwala in the Havasupai region of Grand Canyon National Park. Diana is a medicine woman, and amongst the Havasupai, traditionally only men are allowed to be medicine people, so that gives you a sense of her tenacity. She's an incredible, inspiring woman. The Havasupai, as a people, have a long history in Grand Canyon National Park and an extremely painful recent history in the region. When the National Park Service assumed management of Grand Canyon in 1916, the Havasupai were evicted. They were kicked out of this place that they had called home for over 900 years. That's twice as long as Europeans had been on the continent at that point in 1916. And they were kicked out because having people living in Grand Canyon didn't fit the National Park Service's image of pristine, untrammeled landscape that they wanted to project. Despite this painful history, Diana remained so focused on the positive. She was all about collaboration. How can we move forward together? Her great message was that, yes, of course, people have the power to hurt each other and our environment, but we also have the power to heal. Diana gave us some advice that I want to share with you all. She said, look inside and identify your tools. Think about your unique tools, your skills, your perspective, your experiences, your vision. And of course, the key idea that everybody in this room, everybody watching this video at home, everybody in the world has these tools. And then ask yourself, how can I use these tools? Where do the world's needs intersect with what I have to offer, what I can bring to the table? And I have to admit that while she was saying this, I was on the verge of tears, because this is exactly what we were trying to do, right? Our tool was music, and we had this lofty goal. We were out trying to start a new conversation around public lands, a conversation that was inclusive and open-minded and focused on the places where we can come together instead of the places that drive us apart. Obviously, the reality of the film shoot was never quite so romantic. Mostly it was trying to keep our instruments in tune in a desert. Literally keep them from melting. The glue in the violin and the cello could just come apart. Made it rather exciting. Or it was pausing our sweeping discussions of pressing environmental issues to deal with the pressing issue of emptying the sewage tank of the RV. But things like that were the necessary work involved to live by Diana's advice, to use our tools and our creativity to seek meaning and purpose, to confront the terrible irony that our public lands, which are quite literally common ground, are so divisive. Diana also noted some tools that we all share: compassion, gratitude, generosity, love. Simple words, she called them. And I'll be the first to admit that it's really easy to roll your eyes at ideas like that, at words like that. It's really hard to integrate those simple words into your everyday, your every interaction. And maybe some of you are thinking, okay, well, how can me embodying generosity and love make any difference? And we're back to that question, who am I? We're back to imposter syndrome. In response to that, I would say it's okay to start small. Have a conversation with somebody from a different perspective, a different frame of reference. It doesn't have to be someone on the opposite end of the political spectrum. Maybe you grew up in a city and they grew up on a farm. Share your different viewpoints. Find a place where you disagree. And when you feel the impulse to argue, try to ask a question instead. And genuinely try to hear what they say in response. And if you're having a hard time finding somebody to talk to, we can help you. Visit confluencethejourney.com/connect. You can whip out your phones and make our website crash right now. And we will do our best to connect you with someone we think you'll find interesting. We'll provide conversation guidelines and sample questions to ensure that you both have a positive experience. And again, I'll be the first to admit that a single conversation is not going to solve all the world's problems. A single human life is not going to save the world. But I do believe that if we come together, and if we listen to each other, and if we meet as human beings and not as representatives of divisive political ideas, and if we all work to identify our tools and ask how we can use them, maybe we won't save the world, but a lot becomes possible. Our tools will be different from each other, as multifaceted as water itself, and the tools that serve utilitarian purposes will be no more or less important than the tools that simply inspire wonder or gratitude. And each use of a tool, each positive action, will be a single shining drop in the river. The Colorado starts as a small trickle in Rocky Mountain National Park, barely larger than a creek. And as it flows south and west, its waters meet the waters of the Eagle River, and then the Roaring Fork, and then the Gunnison. In Dinosaur National Monument, it comes into a confluence with the Green River, which carries the waters of the Yampa. Then it goes on and joins the San Juan, the Escalante, the Little Colorado, and several others. And over enough time, what started as a tiny trickle, a tiny collection of single drops, becomes a force powerful enough to carve the Grand Canyon. I have a surprise for you guys today. Sarah, my bandmate, is actually here, and she's going to join me on stage. We'd like to play a song for you. It's a song, don't clap yet, you haven't heard it. It's a song that was initially inspired by our conversation with Diana. Diana called the Colorado River the spine of the mother. And so it's a song called Spine. And I hope you listen closely. You'll hear her ideas of simple words, her message of that people have the power to hurt, but also to heal. And I think it's worth saying that this song, although it was inspired by Diana, for me at least really came to encapsulate the heart and soul of this entire project. And so I'll leave you with a lyric from one of our other songs before we play it for you. It goes like this: if nothing else, as you go, as you make your way, hear this: go and light up the world. Thank you.
Soon to hear.